GamerPoets strives to create the most informative and easy-to-navigate tutorials available, driven by viewer feedback and contribution. What some would do in multiple videos, we do in one. Since the videos are packed full of so much information, a lot of which the general viewer may not even care to know, navigation is provided to accommodate the individual as much as possible. Navigation is appropriately labeled within the sidebar via annotations to each major section. Occasionally, if and when it's needed, a sliding tray will drop down from the top right of the user interface. This has been implemented to allow viewers to skip over information that does not pertain to them in a progressive manner without having to check the video description or without having to guess while dragging on the timeline. However, the video description does provide navigation to every section of the tutorial step by step, and I recommend that it be utilized on subsequent viewings. Finally, video platforms such as YouTube are subject to change. The GamerPoets video interface has been organized in a way that hopes to weather future amendments within the platform. Though, the older this video gets, the more potential there is for the annotations to be hindered. The Memory Blocks Log, created by Shessen, is an SKSE plugin that allows us to log the default heap and scrap heap memory usage so that we may fine-tune the Skyrim memory patch to our personal setup. When Skyrim is launched, the game allocates the default heap memory block with 256 megabytes of memory. This memory is kept in reserve and is therefore untouched by all other game processes to allow us some breathing room for those times when large amounts of high-resolution textures and multiple NPCs are on screen at the same time, as well as any other visual rendering processes. Once the initial 256 megabytes of memory is filled up, additional small chunks of default heap memory are allocated so that we don't simply crash due to filling up the default heap block. However, the additional default heap chunks are unstable. Instead of being able to utilize the extra memory reserves, when the default heap block reaches its limit, the game simply crashes. To get around this issue, Shessen created the Skyrim memory patch to allow us to increase the amount of default heap memory that we can set aside at the game's startup via the SKSE launcher. This allows us to reserve any amount of default heap memory that we wish, without ever having to use the unstable additional chunks of default heap memory, thus avoiding crashes. The only downside to memory allocation is that the game has a limit of how much memory it can utilize for all of its processes, both on-screen and off. Whatever the amount of memory is that we choose to reserve when using the Skyrim memory patch will never be able to be utilized for the other tasks of the engine which use other types of memory. To get around this single potential issue, Shessen created the Memory Blocks Log to allow us to track how much heap memory is actually being used at any given time. The log can be viewed after closing or crashing the game. Navigate to nexusmods.com/Skyrim/mods/50471. Open the File section. Mod Organizer users select the Download with Manager button beneath the Only Main Files option. Non-Mod Organizer users select the Download Manually hyperlink. By default, the archive will be downloaded to your Downloads folder. Non-Mod Organizer users skip to the next subsection of this tutorial. Open Mod Organizer. Open the Downloads tab in the right pane window. Double-click the Memory Block Archive. At the Install Mods window, right-click the Data option with the checkbox next to it and select Set Data Directory. Select OK. The load order does not matter. However, I like to keep all of my SKSE plugins at the top so that I can better manage them. Right-click the Memory Blocks Log mod in the left pane window. Select Open in Explorer. Open the SKSE folder. Open the Plugins folder. Double-click to open the Memory Blocks Log.ini file. Locate the setting Default Log Locations equals True. By default, this value will place the log into the overwrite folder after the game closes. If you desire, you can set this value to false, which will place the Memory Blocks log.log file into the Skyrim game folder after the game closes. Take note of the other settings if you care to. Their descriptions are self-explanatory. Close and save the ini file. Mod Organizer users can skip to the next main section of the tutorial. Non-Mod Organizer users navigate to the Memory Block Log archive and open it. Open the Data folder, open the SKSE folder, open the Plugins folder. In a second window, navigate to Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Skyrim, Data, SKSE, plugins. Copy the memoryblockslog.dll and the memoryblockslog.ini file from the archive into the plugins folder. By default, the memoryblockslog.log file will appear here in the SKSE plugins folder. If you care to change the location in which the log will appear, open the memoryblockslog.ini file. Locate the setting default log location equals true. Set this value to false, and the log will appear in the Skyrim game folder. Take note of the other settings if you care to. Their descriptions are self-explanatory. Close and save the ini file. When testing your game, you should have all of the mods that you plan on playing with installed. If you are truly fine-tweaking your game, you should test again after adding mods that increase texture resolutions, as well as mods that add characters and clutter, as no single load order will be exactly like any other, and you will have to figure out your numbers for yourself. You should also have the skse.ini file and the Skyrim memory patch established as we did in the skse Skyrim script extender start-to-finish tutorial. Launch Skyrim. Go to a place in-game that has a lot of high-resolution textures and NPCs. Examples of such places are the Solitude and Windhelm docks. To quickly get to either location, open the console and type COC, leaving a space, Solitude Docks 01, or COC, leave a space, Windhelm Docks Exterior 01, and you will instantly be teleported to either location. Walk around the area. Try to get as many NPCs on screen at once as you can, as well as much clutter and objects. Keep walking around. Spin the camera in circles. Sprint, jump, go crazy. If you haven't crashed, you are doing good so far. After a minute or two of running around and testing out the area, exit the game if it hasn't crashed. If it has crashed, that is fine as well at this moment. Open either the Skyrim game folder or the SKSE plugins folder. Locate the memoryblockslog.log file and open it. At the top of the log, there are two blocks. Block 1 represents the default heap memory. Block 2 represents the scrap heap memory. Scroll down and notice that the logged memory slowly yet steadily increases. This is because we have the setting max only set to true within the memoryblockslog.ini file. If you care to see the increase and decrease over time, you can set this value to false. However, it's not necessary to achieve our main goal, which is to determine what we should set the default heap size to in our skse.ini file to both avoid crashing and to minimize the memory allocation to only what we need. The reason that we do not need to pay attention to the scrap heap value is that the additional chunks of memory created by the scrap heap block, unlike the default heap block, are stable. This is the non-critical information correction that I typed about in the top comment on the final SKSE video. Whether you crashed or closed the game manually, the very last entry is how many megabytes of heap memory that was being used at that time. Now, keeping the log open, if we navigate to our SKSE.ini, we will notice that our default value for default heap initial alloc MB, which is the amount of memory that we are allocating to the default heap block, is 768. Comparing that number to our log, mine being 371, we can see that we can lower this amount by a great deal based on this test. However, we need to understand the equation. The actual amount of memory that we can use is the total of our default heap initial alloc MB setting minus 256. So, block 1, with these current ini settings, can actually only go as high as 512 megabytes before the game crashes. Now, take the 512 that we have allocated and subtract the highest block 1 value in our memory blocks log to see what our buffer zone is before we crash. In my case, with the highest value for block 1 being 371, I will subtract 371 from 512 and get 141 megabytes left over. If this was my final load order and I was not going to add any more mods, 141 is way more of a buffer than is needed. Suggested by Shessen, a good buffer zone is about 60 megabytes. With that in mind, 141 minus 60 is 81 megabytes. This means that I can free up 81 extra megabytes in my default heap setting and test again. To do this, I will go back to the SKSE.ini file, subtract 81 from the default heap initial alloc MB's current value of 768, which gives me a new value of 687. Other game processes will now have an additional 81 megabytes of memory to use if they need it. This will help with game slowdowns, other types of crashes, and whatever else the game needs it for. If my game happens to crash after lowering this value, I can raise it by another 10 megabytes or so and try playing the game again. In the case that you reached your default heap block limit while playing and the game crashed, raise the default heap initial alloc MB setting by 120 or so. This number is to give yourself a buffer zone. Retest, come back, and act accordingly. And some final notes. Yes, default heap initial alloc MB values can be lower than 768, and yes, default heap initial alloc MB values can be higher than 768. Crashes and freezing is an issue that occurs on a system-to-system basis, which is why we are testing. In the end, some users may have to simply uninstall some high-resolution textures and/or mods. In most cases, this should fix your Skyrim while allowing you to utilize more mods than we were previously able to. In all cases, this will benefit your game one way or another. My references for this video are Chesson and Chesson alone. He has taught me so much in such a short period of time. He has done so in the past, and I hope he cares to deal with me again in the future. As I stated, as well as what I typed in the top post of the final SKSE video, the scrap heap block is in fact 100% stable. What is not stable is the extra memory chunks that the default heap block allocates after it fills up its initial reserves. I apologize for any confusion. As always, I am Michael of GamerPoets. Thank you for watching.